So Joud and I will be reading together from a set of notes that we've prepared as part of a kind of ongoing project that we're also hoping would continue and be built upon the next period of time. I hand it over to Joud, but I think also she would like to share its screen, so maybe we take a second to set that up. You're muted, I think, Joud.
Sorry, give me a second. All right. Thank you once again, everyone, for having us. It's a great pleasure to be here among so many friends and comrades. I'm going to go straight into reading our text. So the title, as presented by Lama, is The Distance of 100 Miles. And we're going to begin with this prologue. Quote, "And there was a wild fruit tree that we started eating from to keep our strength up. There was also that nettle I was telling you about. We started eating its seeds. Then we'd wait until sunset. We didn't move during the day. We moved at night." These are the words of Muhammad al-Arda as he described the 5 days he spent on the run with fellow escapee Zakaria Zubaydi following the Jalboua prison break on 6th of September 2021. During those first 48 hours, the two remained put during the day, evading surveillance, and moved in the night through a landscape made unfamiliar to the two men from Jenin camp by years of colonial theft. They avoided any encounter with others, even missing a fleeting moment with their fellow fugitives, Mahmoud al-Arda and Yaqub Qadiri, while on the run. It took 2 or 3 days for the men to figure out that they were in the village of Tamra in Palestine 48. In search of water and sustenance, Zubaydi would then point to a building under construction, which became the men's regular nightly visit. It was there that they'd find food and water left over from a day of labor by Palestinian construction workers. During the day, Arda recounts, we'd go to the fields and just sit there, as if on a picnic. We'd make fire and brew coffee, brewed in a pot Arda had found and returned brand new after cleaning it with dirt.
Drawing primarily on the notes, writings, and oral accounts of Palestinian fugitives, escapees, or prisoners in revolt, this project attempts to think fugitivity as a practice of freedom, shaped by a return to political life. Reading the long journey of catastrophe under settler colonialism through the lens of carcerality, we want to ask how the labor of the Palestinian fugitive rearranges space, time, and sociality. We start by offering a few notes on carcerality, and then we engage with Muhammad al-Arda's first-hand testimony, as he provided it in an interview in March of 2025, following his release in January of that same year as part of the flood of the free exchange made possible by the resistance. Understanding the importance of maintaining the secrecy of clandestine practices and networks, we rely on information made public as first-hand accounts. We also acknowledge the practice of translation as one of political weight, and carry that as a responsibility and compass. At this critical moment of expanded mass killing across Palestine, Lebanon, and Iran, but also ongoing resistance, it is imperative to look towards these traditions of political refusal that continue to haunt and destabilize the space-time of the settler order across its local and planetary scales.
A few notes on carceral regimes. The idea of the prison makes it, as Ori Sanmi Burton writes in engagement with the martyred prisoner Walid Daqqa, the paradigm for how the world works and how power works under colonialism. To take this seriously requires an elaboration of carcerality along two interrelated axes, as an expanded space-time and as a mode of politicide. First, as Bassel Faraj describes, carcerality in the Palestinian context is all-encompassing. It operates through the transformation of the geography of Palestine in its entirety into a set of carceralized locations, an expanded spatial intervention that exceeds the formal boundaries of the prison. Whether in Gaza, the West Bank, or 48, this manifests through a range of spatial arrangements: the prison, the checkpoint, the surveillance tower, the settlement, the inaccessible road, the camp, the siege. These mechanisms do not simply reorganize space or capture bodies. They also refashion time. In his reflections on the camp, Nasser Abu Rahmeh describes it as a spatial device for the immobilization of time. One can think of carcerality more generally in these terms, as a deformation of space-time in which time is stretched into an eternal present of capture, marked by a future foreclosed and a past severed.
Second, as per Da'a, carcerality operates as politicide, a fully fledged assault on Palestinian political subjectivity aimed at eroding the social and cultural fabric that upholds resistance as an individual task and collective duty. This operation traverses the inside and the outside of the prison, or what Da'a describes as the smaller prison and the bigger prison. What is enacted upon the individual within the cell is reproduced across the broader social fabric. In this sense, the carceral regime seeks to reshape consciousness, fragment collective life, and delimit the very conditions of political possibility. It is worth noting here that over the last 2 years, the mechanisms by which the Zionist carceral system molds consciousness grew increasingly imbricated in the genocidal apparatus, as modes of inflicting slow and fast death became ever more consolidated within the existing and newly established detention sites and torture camps. While these structures operate with particular intensity within the Palestinian geography, they are not exceptional. One can trace continuities across both regional and planetary scales, particularly in the intensified circulation of carceral practices, technologies, and forms of governance in recent years. Yet these carceral regimes are never totalizing, nor can they fully foreclose politics. As Faraj, Mail Battat, and Hashim Abu Shama write, confinement presupposes flight. It is precisely from within these conditions that fugitivity emerges as a constitutive counter-practice. This intervention thus reads, in close relation to Arda's own words, the labor of the fugitive as a site of a political possibility, a counter-proposal that rearranges space, time, and sociality against the carceral order.
Part 1, Space. Quote, "We had already been free from prison 9 months before we actually got out, before you all knew we were out. Every day I would go down, or my brothers would go underground, and we'd feel free, like I'm not behind their walls anymore, no longer inside their prison." End quote. Remarkably, freedom here precedes the moment of escape. It is not inaugurated by an act of exit, but is instead cultivated through the collective labor of producing space, through the digging of the tunnel. In this sense, freedom here exceeds its liberal conceptualization as a purely metaphysical or juridical condition. Rather, as also argued by Ruth Wilson Gilmore in her articulation of an abolition geography, Arda's testimony asserts that freedom is a place. It is precisely the fugitivity of the tunnel here that constitutes it as such. The subterranean becomes a geography through which an extraterritorial outside of the prison is constructed. Hence the insistence, I'm no longer inside. Beneath the surface, inmates, otherwise disciplined through a regime of hypervisibility, where surveillance depends on what can be seen and heard, become undetectable. In the space, they momentarily evade infrastructures of capture and control, As Al-Arda reflects later in the interview, we used to move under the rooms like we were swimming beneath them. We'd go under room 1, room 2. Against the immobilizing structure of the prison and its underlying logic of politicide, the tunnel as a practice of fugitivity enables a subversive mobility, a return to movement that is simultaneously a return to politics. The architect of the tunnel is also, as Saba al-Nab describes, the architecture, of the tunnel is also, as Saba al-Nab describes, a result of a specific and growing know-how, a side of wretched knowledge with the innate capacity to regenerate and reshape itself into derivative forms, continuously resisting structures, generating its absence. Like the tunnels of Gaza, referenced by Al-Arda as a precedent that inspired their efforts, the underground space forged through collective effort projects not only an immediate escape from confinement, but also gestures towards a broader horizon of national liberation.
Part 2. Time. Quote, the officer told me, was it worth it going through all that trouble, and here you are captives yet again 5 days later? I told him, even if it was just 1 minute, yeah, it was worth it, and I would do it again. He said, are you serious? I said, yes, I'm serious. He doesn't understand what it means for a person to be confined, cut off from their family, punished like that. They put a lot of pressure on people in prison. With the long years and the distance, people started losing their families, their mothers. New creatures were growing back home, kids being born. I'd lose my father, lose my mother, lose my relatives, all while I'm in prison. End quote. Carcerality is a regime where time is stolen and futures are indefinitely deferred. Or as freed prisoner Layan Kayed put it, time stops at the date of your detention. On a similar note to Arda's formulation, Kayed suggests that one technique to defeat this loss is to undermine its temporality. In relation to this, we propose to think of fugitivity as a form of temporal disobedience. Against the temporal stagnancy imposed by captivity, a counter-subjectivity emerges. Here, movement is a practice of time. This speaks to what Abu Rahma frames as Palestinian practices with a relationship to time that we can view as a grammar of refusal. It is a reformulation of time against its valorization by the settler order. A minute of freedom will always be worth the years of captivity, as Arda insists, because it refuses the stretched permanence that the prison attempts to engineer and opens, even if for a moment, another imaginary. These moments can be read as an act of return to follow Adam Haj Yahya, an act that seeks to abolish the very conditions from which it emerges and makes possible another present. Arda acknowledges the value of this fleeting moment and its significance beyond its limited time, when he later reflects on its meaning as an act that could ripple through Palestinian society and destabilize the status quo despite the possibility of being martyred right at the gate. This question on meaning would come up repeatedly with his inmates prior to their escape. But the time of fugitivity is also an intertwining of speeds, of flight and fight. Or as Dylan Saba put it, Palestinian escape is the art of moving fast while staying put. There is the slow, patient labor of digging, of awaiting the right moment, or waiting out the enemy, complemented with the quick and incisive collective movement of prison break. Arda describes these speeds, but also thinks through the structure of repetition that upholds them. The repetition over decades of the escape that only fully materializes years later. The daily repetition of digging and hiding, and the continuous reopening of seemingly fleeting, yet always accumulative moments of return.
Part 3, Sociality. Quote, Mahmoud didn't want me working on the digging. He wanted me handling the organizational work above ground. Like if the prison administration showed up or anything came up, I'd deal with them. There were things connected to the outside that were just as important as the digging itself. End quote. While narratives that proliferated in the weeks following the Jalboua prison break often framed the event through the spectacle of individual heroism, this testimony articulates a different politics. What emerges instead is fugitivity as a collective social form, one that depends not only on physical labor, but on coordination, discipline, and broader processes of organizing and study. As Arda emphasizes, responsibility for organization was on all of us. It was collective. Everyone knew exactly what their role was in any given place. The tunnel, in this sense, is not merely an infrastructural feat, but the material expression of a distributed intelligence, a carefully orchestrated division of labor in which visibility, timing, and risk are collectively managed. Earlier in the interview, we also learn of forms of sociality that emerged around experiences of fugitivity preceding Jalboua. Al-Arda points to the networks through which food, shelter, and information are organized to sustain fugitives while on the run. These practices extend beyond the prison, embedding flight or escape within a broader social field. Not long ago, such dynamics were visible in Noor Sham's refugee camp, where in the weeks preceding an IOF invasion meant to ethnically cleanse it, residents distributed food and water across makeshift points in the camp to support fugitive militants under siege. What he describes as al-Hadin al-Sha'biyya, the social base, names precisely this diffuse infrastructure of solidarity and protection, a collective capacity to host, conceal, and sustain those in flight. This broader ecology of support also recalls the figure of Muhammad al-Dayf, whose field name, as a friend recounts, emerged from his condition as a perpetual guest, moving from house to house, sustained by the hospitality of many during his years of evasion. Fugitivity here is not an individual condition, but a relational one made possible through dense networks of obligation, trust, and shared struggle.
Concluding notes. In the days following the recapture of the Jalboua escapees, a leaked video showed one of the six, Ayham al-Kamamji, being escorted by security forces as he turned to the camera and recited the poem he had written in his prison cell earlier. Merj ibn Amir, rise and tell a story. Its heroes hastened toward the most merciful. They cared not for the tyrant's shackles or their prisons. They shunned the chains of humiliation and deprivation. For the free refuses to be bound, and the falcon disdains the meekness of sheep. My cell is 1 by 1 meter in length, and add half a meter more to its width. But my consolation is that in Gaza, we have brothers, though in their captivity, they are like ravens.
2 years later, the resistance in Gaza would carry out a prison break, inaugurating Al-Aqsa flood, which then freed thousands of Palestinian prisoners in subsequent prisoner exchanges, amongst them some of the Jalboua escapees. The continuity between these two moments allows us to reckon with the political horizon that flight opens up in the face of colonial enclosure. These two prison breaks are part of a long accumulation of fugitive moments, of escape as already a counterattack, as Dylan Saba puts it, that rupture the imaginary of defeat engineered by the colonizer, redefining possibility and intervening into the material conditions that hold natives as captive populations. The veracity of the Zionist entity's genocidal onslaught, in addition to mass extermination, attempted to silence that imagination and mold consciousness far beyond the geography of Gaza. As carcerality continues to be imbricated in reproducing the long durée of catastrophe across the globe, fugitivity through making territory, reopening temporal possibilities, and insisting on sociality in the face of fragmentation, continues to shape a condition for possibility of life and a return to politics in Palestine and beyond. We return at the toughest of moments to the testimony of Al-Arda and others in an attempt to study fugitive practices in their minute details and in the language of those who carry out and continue to teach this labor of freedom. And it is to them that we remain indebted. Thank you.